Nova's boots echoed through the grimy alleyways of the neon-lit city. Raindrops danced on the cobblestones, reflecting the multitude of hues from the flickering signs above. Her trench coat clung to her like a second skin, the fabric whispering a tune of its own with every step she took. She had seen this city change over the years, the gleaming towers rise and fall, the neon lights pulse with the heartbeat of the digital underworld. Yet, she remained a constant in this ever-evolving chaos, a reminder of the grit that had shaped its core. Her eyes scanned the shadowy figures that flitted from one pool of light to the next, looking for a particular one that had been haunting her thoughts for days. The whispers of the night air brought with them the scent of wet metal and ozone, a symphony of scents that spoke of the city's soul. The murmur of distant sirens was a backdrop to the rhythmic patter of rain. Above, the skyscrapers stretched skyward, their gleaming surfaces marred by the relentless downpour. Ghost leaned against a dumpster, a cigarette hanging loosely from his lips, watching the rain turn the neon lights into a watercolor masterpiece. He was young, too young for the world he'd been thrust into, but he had a spirit that burned brighter than the most advanced cybernetic circuits. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue, darted across the alley, scanning for any signs of trouble. The world had taught him to be wary, to trust no one, especially in a place where the rich got richer and the poor got forgotten. Their paths would soon cross, but for now, they were strangers in the night, each with their own battles to fight. Nova had once been a guardian of this concrete jungle, a beacon of justice in a sea of greed. But the badge had turned into a weight around her neck, a symbol of a system she could no longer trust. Now, she was a bounty hunter, her heart a little less gold, her morals a little more flexible. And Ghost, well, he was just trying to survive, one hack at a time. The alley grew quieter as the rain picked up pace. Nova felt the drops hit her cheek, a cold reminder of the world outside her own thoughts. She was about to turn the corner when a shadow moved, breaking the monotony of the night. A figure emerged, tall and slender, the rain glistening off their long, dark coat. The broker. His eyes met hers, and she knew the moment had come. The game was afoot, and she had a role to play, whether she liked it or not. The figure beckoned, and without a word, she followed. The alley grew darker, the neon lights fading behind them, leaving only the echo of their footsteps and the promise of a stormy night ahead. Nova's hand hovered over her gun, a silent promise to the city that she was still watching, still ready to fight for what was right. As they approached a nondescript door, the broker spoke, his voice a slick whisper in the rain. "I've got a job for you, Nova. One that'll change everything." The broker's words sent a shiver down her spine. His eyes were like black pools, reflecting the neon chaos of the city, but devoid of any emotion. Nova knew that look. It meant he was holding all the cards, and she was about to play a hand she hadn't chosen. "Infiltrate the Phoenix Corp," he continued, his tone as cold as the steel of the gun she holstered at her side. "They've got something I need. Something that could shift the balance of power in this city. If it falls into the wrong hands." Nova raised an eyebrow, skepticism etched into the lines of her face. "And why should I care?" The broker leaned in closer, his breath a warm whisper against her ear. "Because if you do this, I can make all your troubles disappear." Her troubles. The flashes that haunted her dreams, the debts she couldn't pay, the family she had lost to the very streets she now walked. It was a tempting offer, but she knew better than to trust a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes. Entering the dimly lit room, the air thick with the scent of burnt circuits and stale coffee, she saw Ghost clearly for the first time. His fingers danced across a keyboard, a symphony of light playing across his features. The room was a cocoon of screens and wires, a sanctuary from the storm outside. He looked up, the cigarette still smoldering between his lips, and gave her a nod of acknowledgement. "You're the legend," he said, his voice a mix of awe and defiance. "Ex-cop turned bounty hunter. You've got quite the rep." Nova's gaze hardened. "And you're the hacker with more mouth than sense. Let's get to work." The broker laid out the details of the heist, a piece of tech called the Nexus Chip, rumored to hold the key to unlocking the city's most secure systems. It was a prize that could make or break them, a tool that could either free the city from its corporate chains or plunge it further into despair. You two make an interesting pair, the broker mused, watching them size each other up. The old guard and the new rebellion. But you're the only ones who can pull this off. I've got eyes everywhere, and they tell me you're the best at what you do. The tension grew as the storm outside reached a crescendo, thunder rattling the windows. Nova felt the weight of the city's fate resting on her shoulders. The rain pounded against the glass, a drumbeat to the rhythm of their impending mission. They had 2 days to prepare, 2 days to get into the most heavily fortified building in the city, and 2 days to get out with the Nexus Chip. Time was their enemy, and the city was their battleground. Nova knew that every step they took from this moment on would be shadowed by danger, every move scrutinized by the corporate overlords that ruled from above. With a curt nod, she accepted the job. We'll need gear. And information. The broker's smile grew. Of course. I'll provide what I can. But remember, the rest is up to you. And be warned, the deeper you dig, the more you'll find that isn't what it seems. As the broker disappeared into the shadows, the rain outside grew heavier, mirroring the weight of the task ahead. Nova turned to Ghost, the neon lights casting a kaleidoscope of colors across their faces. Ready to make some waves? She asked, her voice a low growl. Ghost took a long drag on his cigarette, his eyes glinting with excitement. Better grab your raincoat, he said, a hint of a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. It's about to get wet. And with that, their journey into the heart of the city's underbelly began, a dance of shadows and neon, where the line between right and wrong blurred like the rain-soaked streets below. Nova and Ghost dove into the task with a fervor that belied their reluctant alliance. The first stop was a grimy, hole-in-the-wall bar that served as a hub for the city's misfits and malcontents. It was the kind of place where the drinks were strong, the music loud, and the patrons had stories etched into their cybernetic limbs. The air was thick with the scent of cheap alcohol, and the electricity of secrets whispered in hushed tones. They needed intel, and this was where the whispers grew the loudest. Ghost's fingers flew across his cyberdeck, a device that looked like a relic of a bygone era, but held more power than the sleekest of smartphones. He hacked into the city's grid, pulling up schematics of the Phoenix Court building, blueprints that revealed its most hidden secrets. Nova studied the screens, her mind racing with tactics, the ghosts of her past lives as a cop guiding her through the labyrinth of security protocols and potential traps. The Nexus Chip is in the server room, on the 52nd floor, Ghost murmured, his eyes never leaving the screen. But the real problem is the security. The place is a fortress, and the digital defenses are tighter than a cybernetic grip. Nova nodded, her mind racing. We'll need to go in through the sewers, avoid the main entrances, and we'll need a way to disable the drones and the AI security. They spent hours strategizing, their thoughts a tangled web of potential solutions and deadly obstacles. The rain outside had turned into a torrent, the sound of it a constant reminder of the clock ticking down. The city was a living entity, its pulse a mix of the digital and the organic, and it was this rhythm they would have to disrupt to succeed. As the night grew deep, they found themselves in a dingy garage, surrounded by the gleaming metal of modified bikes and cars. The smell of oil and grease mixed with the acrid scent of burning plastic as they worked on their gear. Nova checked her weapon, a sleek, custom-made sidearm that had seen more battles than she cared to remember. Ghost tinkered with a small device, something that would hopefully fool the building's state-of-the-art security system. The plan was simple but fraught with danger. Create a distraction to draw the drones away from the server room, infiltrate the building, retrieve the chip, and get out before the alarm was raised. But in a city where the simple act of breathing could be a gamble, simplicity was a luxury they couldn't afford. You know the risks, Nova said, her voice low and serious. This isn't a game, Ghost. People die for this kind of thing. Ghost looked up, his eyes meeting hers. Yeah, I know. But I also know that we're the ones who can do it. And maybe, just maybe, we'll make a difference. The storm raged on, the city's lights flickering in and out of existence as the wind howled through the streets. Nova felt a strange kinship with the young hacker, a bond forged in the crucible of necessity and hope. They were two lost souls navigating a world that had no use for them, except when it needed someone to do the dirty work. As the first light of dawn began to pierce the gloom, they were ready. Suited up in the latest in stealth tech, their gear checked and rechecked. They looked like a mismatched pair of Avengers ready to take on the corporate behemoth. Nova took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the city on her shoulders. Ghost just grinned, a wild, reckless smile that made her heart clench. They rode into the storm on their silent bikes, the city a blur of neon and shadow as they disappeared into the night. The rain pounded against their helmets, a drumbeat that matched the pulse of their hearts. They were about to make history, or become a footnote in the annals of feudal rebellion. Either way, it was going to be a hell of a ride. The sewer entrance was a grim reminder of the city's underbelly, a world beneath the gleaming towers where the forgotten and the desperate made their homes. Nova felt at home in the darkness, her eyes adjusting to the low light as they navigated the twisting tunnels. Ghost led the way, his cybernetic enhancements allowing him to see through walls and navigate the labyrinth with ease. As they approached the building, the air grew thick with tension. The sounds of the city above were muffled, replaced by the hum of servers and the occasional clank of metal on metal. They dismounted their bikes, leaving them hidden in the shadows of the sewer. Nova checked her gear one last time, the cold steel of her sidearm comforting against her thigh. Ghost held up a hand, his eyes narrowed as he listened to the whispers of the city's digital veins. "Now," he murmured, his voice nearly silent in the damp air. "We make our move." They climbed the ladder, the metal rungs slippery with moisture, and emerged into a service corridor. The air was stale, the scent of recycled oxygen and cold concrete filling their nostrils. Nova's boots made no sound as they hit the floor, a testament to the quality of the gear the broker had provided. Ghost pulled out a slim device, and the lights in the corridor flickered before going out. The silence was deafening, the city holding its breath around them. They moved like shadows, Nova's instincts honed from years on the Force guiding them through the maze of corridors. They encountered a patrol drone, its red eyes scanning the area. Ghost tapped a button on his wrist, and it froze, a silent sentinel in the dark. They passed it, their breaths shallow and measured. The server room was close, the heart of the beast they sought to slay. The door was a fortress of steel and circuitry, but Ghost's magic made it open with a soft hiss. The room beyond was a cathedral of technology, the servers humming a low chant that filled the space. Nova's eyes swept the room, looking for threats as Ghost went to work on the mainframe. The seconds ticked by, each one louder than the last. And then, the air changed. The hum grew louder, the lights flickered, and the room was bathed in a sudden red glow. "We've got company," Nova murmured, her hand tightening on her gun. Ghost's fingers flew over the keyboard, his eyes locked on the screen. "Almost there," he said, his voice strained. The door slammed shut, the lock engaging with a final, ominous click. Nova knew they had seconds before the alarms were triggered, before the corridors outside filled with guards and drones. "Now, Ghost," she said, her voice low and dangerous. With a final flourish, Ghost pulled the chip from the server, and the room went dark. The emergency lights kicked in, casting an eerie glow over the room. The alarms began to wail, a siren's call to war. They had the Nexus Chip, but the game was far from over. The beast was awake now, and it was hungry for blood. Their hearts racing, they sprinted back through the corridors, the echoes of their footsteps chasing them like the apparitions of their pasts. Nova could feel the heat of the city's anger rising around them, the pulse of the neon lights sinking with their panic. They reached the ladder just as the first drones arrived, its red eyes piercing the gloom. Nova took out two with quick, efficient shots, its metal bodies clattering to the ground. Ghost scrambled up the ladder, the chip clutched in his hand like a lifeline. They slammed the manhole cover shut, the sound lost in the storm above. The sewer water rushed around them, a cold embrace that washed away their fear, if only for a moment. Their bikes waited, silent sentinels in the gloom. They mounted up, the engines purring to life as the rain began to fall once more. The city's veins were now flooded with the news of their heist, the digital whispers growing into a cacophony of alarms and alerts. They had to move fast, to stay one step ahead of the corporate dragnet that would soon be cast in their wake. Nova felt the adrenaline coursing through her as they sped through the streets, the neon lights painting the world in a stark, otherworldly palette. The rain had turned the cityscape into a blur of color and shadow, a living, breathing entity that both shielded and pursued them. Ghost weaved through the traffic with a skill that belied his youth, the stolen Nexus chip nestled safely in his pocket. The plan was to deliver the chip to the broker and disappear, but as they approached the rendezvous point, the city's mood shifted. The neon lights flickered, the buildings looming like silent sentinels. Nova's instinct screamed a warning, but she pushed the thought aside. They were almost there. But the city had other ideas. The skies opened up, releasing a deluge that seemed to wash away all semblance of order. The streets turned to rivers, the neon lights reflecting off the water in a dizzying display. And then, the world went dark. The power grid had been compromised. The city plunged into a chaos that even the most sophisticated AI couldn't control. The lights of the towering skyscrapers flickered and died, leaving only the emergency beacons to pierce the inky blackness. It was a scene out of a dystopian nightmare, a moment that seemed to freeze time itself. And in that moment, Nova knew the job was far from over. The Nexus chip was more than just a piece of tech. It was a Pandora's box that had been opened, and now they had to deal with the consequences. The storm had become a cover for something much more sinister, and they were in the eye of it. Ghost, she shouted over the roar of the bike engines. We've got a problem. The hacker glanced at her, his eyes wide with a mix of excitement and terror. What is it? The city's gone dark, she yelled back. We're not just thieves anymore. We're in the middle of a war. The words hung in the air, the weight of their situation pressing down on them like the rain. The chase was on, and the stakes had just been raised to a level neither of them had ever imagined. They had to find the broker, deliver the chip, and get out before the city swallowed them whole. But as they rounded the final corner to the rendezvous, they found themselves face to face with a new kind of enemy. The streets were blocked by a phalanx of armed guards, their faces hidden behind sleek, black helmets that reflected the chaos around them. The neon lights cast an eerie glow on their chrome-plated weapons, a silent threat that made Nova's blood run cold. This wasn't just a heist anymore. It was a fight for survival, a battle against the very fabric of the world they knew. And as they dismounted their bikes, guns drawn, the storm raged on, a backdrop to the beginning of the end of everything they had ever known. The guards advanced, their movements synchronized, like a well-oiled machine. Nova's mind raced, calculating angles and probabilities. Ghost's eyes darted from screen to screen on his cyberdeck, searching for a weakness in the digital fortifications around them. We're surrounded, he yelled over the din of the storm. But I've got an idea. Before Nova could protest, he launched a barrage of digital fireworks, a distraction that sent the guards scrambling for cover. They sprinted through the chaos, the sound of gunfire echoing through the deserted streets. The Nexus chip in Ghost's pocket felt like a beating heart, a living entity that had set the city on fire. They reached the rendezvous, a dilapidated warehouse that seemed to lean into the storm. Nova kicked the door open, her gun at the ready. Inside, the broker waited, his silhouette framed by the flickering light of a single neon sign. You're late, he said, his voice a whip crack in the silence. You didn't mention the welcoming party, Nova snarled, throwing him the chip. The broker caught it with a grace that belied his age. His eyes glinted with triumph as he slipped it into a pocket of his immaculate coat. But where's the fun in that? Ghost stepped forward. The rain had plastered his hair to his forehead. What now? The broker's smile was cold. Now, the real game begins. With a flick of his wrist, the warehouse lights came on, revealing a horde of armed men and women. The air reeked of betrayal. Nova's instinct screamed at her to fight, but she knew they were outmatched. The broker had played them from the start, using them as pawns in his twisted game of power. But as the guards closed in, a strange thing happened. The rain outside grew quieter, the thunder a distant memory. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. And in that moment of stillness, Ghost did the unthinkable. He triggered the EMP embedded in his cyberdeck, a device designed to fry any electronics within a 100-foot radius. The world went white as the lights flickered and died, the digital chorus of the city silenced in an instant. The guards' weapons fell to the ground, useless hunks of metal. The broker's smile faltered, his eyes widening in shock as Nova tackled him to get the chip. When the world came back into focus, the room was a tableau of stunned faces and smoking circuits. Nova and Ghost took advantage of the confusion, slipping away into the storm. The Nexus chip was still in play, but the board had changed. They rode through the city, the neon graveyard now a sea of darkness. The rain had become a balm, washing away the grime of their world, offering a glimpse of something cleaner, something more hopeful. They had the power to change everything, but the cost was higher than they could have ever imagined. The silence was a deafening roar, the city holding its breath as they disappeared into the night. The hunt was on, and they were the prey. But Nova knew that sometimes it took a spark in the dark to light the way to a brighter future. And with Ghost by her side, she was ready to burn down the city to find it. They found refuge in an abandoned apartment, high above the flooded streets. The rain had eased, the neon lights below flickering like a broken promise. Nova pulled the Nexus chip from her pocket, the weight of it heavier than the gun at her side. "What do we do now?" Ghost asked, his voice a mix of fear and excitement. "We find out what this thing can do," she said, her eyes never leaving the chip. "And then we decide who it really belongs to." Days turned into nights as they pieced together the puzzle, the stolen moments of quiet a stark contrast to the chaos that raged outside. Ghost's fingers danced across the keyboard, unraveling the code that held the city's fate. Nova kept watch, her thoughts racing. The broker's betrayal had opened her eyes to the depth of the corruption that had seeped into the very fabric of the city she had sworn to protect. The Nexus chip was more than just a tool. It was a key to a Pandora's box that could either save or destroy the city. And as they dug deeper, they uncovered a conspiracy that went far beyond the walls of the Phoenix Corporation. It was a web of deceit that entangled the corporate elite, the government, and even the very people they had thought were allies. The storm had passed, but the city was still a battleground. The power was back, but the chaos remained, a living, breathing entity that had been unleashed by their actions. They had to tread carefully, to use the shadows to their advantage. And so, they waited, biding their time, planning their next move. Nova knew that the broker wouldn't rest until he had the chip back in his grasp. But she had seen the power it held, the potential for change. And she was determined to use it. The night of their counterstrike dawned, the neon lights of the city a stark reminder of the war they were about to wage. They had a new plan, one that would shake the foundations of the city's corrupt heart. Ghost had figured out how to upload the chip's data to the city's network, exposing the truth to the masses. It was a risky move, one that could either spark a revolution or lead to their execution. But it was a chance they had to take. They made their way to the central hub, a towering monolith in the heart of the city. The air was thick with the scent of fear and desperation, the streets eerily empty. The guards they encountered were dispatched swiftly and silently, their bodies left as a trail of breadcrumbs for those who dared to follow. The door to the hub was a monument to the corporate greed that had built this city. It was a fortress of steel and circuitry, a symbol of the power they sought to topple. But Ghost had the key, his cybernetic genius the perfect match for the digital locks that barred their way. As the door slid open, they stepped into a room that hummed with the power of 1,000 secrets. The servers stretched into the darkness, a labyrinth of information that could either set them free or seal their fate. Ghost plugged in the chip, his eyes locked on the screens as the data began to upload. The room grew brighter, the lights pulsing with the rhythm of the city's awakening. "It's working," he murmured, his voice a mix of awe and dread. Nova watched the numbers climb, her heart racing. This was it, the moment of truth. The city was about to learn the price of its silence, the cost of its complacency. And then, the screens went dark. The room was plunged into silence. Ghost turned to her, his eyes wide with terror. "It's done," he whispered. "We've set the city on fire." The world outside had changed, the neon lights now a beacon of hope. The Nexus chip had become a catalyst for change, and they were the spark that had lit the fuse. They left the hub, the echoes of their footsteps the only sound in the once bustling streets. The city was theirs for the taking, the power in their hands. But as they looked up at the towering skyscrapers, the weight of their actions settled on their shoulders. They had started a revolution, but the battle was far from over. Their plan had worked too well. The data from the Nexus chip had spread like a wildfire through the city's network, exposing the darkest secrets of the corporate elite. The city's screens, once filled with mindless entertainment and advertisements, now blazed with the truth of their greed and corruption. The streets below were a maelstrom of chaos. Crowds of citizens, once kept in line by fear and apathy, had taken to the streets, their faces a mix of rage and liberation. The rain had stopped, but the city was still drenched, bathed in the neon glow of a new dawn. Nova's comlink buzzed, a message from an unknown sender. "Meet me at the edge of the city," it read. "Alone." The message was cryptic, but she knew it was the broker. He had survived the digital blitzkrieg, and now he wanted his prize back. She had no intention of going without backup, but she knew Ghost couldn't come with her. This was her fight, a reckoning she had to face alone. With a heavy heart, she left the safety of the shadows, the Nexus Chip tucked into her jacket. The city had transformed around her, the once gleaming towers now scarred with the signs of rebellion. The rain had washed away the grime, revealing the raw steel beneath the gleaming veneer. As she approached the rendezvous, the buildings grew taller, the lights grew dimmer. The city's heart had been exposed, and it was a dark, twisted thing. The broker waited for her, his silhouette a stark contrast against the neon horizon. "You've caused quite a stir," he said, his voice carrying on the wind. "But the game isn't over yet." Nova stepped into the light, her eyes never leaving his. "What do you want?" The broker chuckled, a sound that sent chills down her spine. "The chip, of course. But I'm willing to make a deal." "I don't deal with the likes of you," she spat. "Oh, but you do," he replied, his smile never wavering. "You see, the Nexus Chip is just the beginning. The city is a pawn in a much larger game, and I need you to help me win it." The air grew thick with tension, the neon lights casting an eerie glow on the rain-slicked streets. Nova knew she couldn't trust the broker, but she also knew that the game had changed. The city was in flames, and she had to decide if she wanted to dance in the ashes or rise from the embers. With a sigh, she pulled the chip from her pocket, holding it out like a lifeline. "What's the deal?" The broker stepped closer, his hand reaching for the chip. "Help me take down the corporations," he said, his eyes gleaming. "Together, we can reshape this city into something new." Nova hesitated, the chip hovering between them. For a moment, she could almost believe him. But then she saw the glint of a knife, the reflection of 1,000 broken promises in its gleaming blade. Her hand shot up, the chip a blur as she threw it into the night. The broker's eyes followed its arc, his expression a mix of shock and fury. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. But Nova was already moving, her gun drawn and aimed at his chest. "I don't make mistakes," she said, her voice cold as the steel in her hand. "I make choices." The shot rang out, a single note in the symphony of chaos that was now their city. The broker stumbled back, his hand clutching at the wound, the rage in his eyes fading to shock. Nova didn't wait for him to fall. She was already running, her boots echoing on the wet pavement as she disappeared into the night. The streets had become a battleground, the neon lights flickering like the dying embers of a once great fire. The corporate drones patrolled the skies, their red eyes searching for the source of the digital uprising. Nova weaved through the chaos, her mind racing. She had to find a way to keep the chip out of the wrong hands, to ensure that the power it held didn't destroy the fragile hope that had been born from the ashes of the city's lies. Her comlink buzzed again, a message from Ghost. "I've got a plan," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Meet me at the docks." The docks were a lawless place, a stretch of waterfront where the city's forgotten souls gathered to trade secrets and salvage. It was the perfect place to lay low, to regroup and figure out their next move. Nova sprinted through the storm, her eyes scanning the skies for the telltale signs of pursuit. But the drones had bigger fish to fry, the city's attention drawn to the riots that had erupted in the wake of the Nexus Chip's revelations. When she reached the docks, Ghost was waiting, his eyes wild with excitement and fear. "We have to get out of here," he said, his voice barely audible over the crash of the waves. "There's a boat, a fast one. We can use it to get the chip to the rebellion." Nova nodded, the weight of the decision heavy on her shoulders. The rebellion was a rumor in the dark, an apparition that had been haunting the city's underbelly for years. But now, With the Nexus Chip's power at their fingertips, they had a chance to become something more. They boarded the boat, the engine roaring to life as they sped away from the city. The water was a black void, the neon lights of the city a distant memory. They had a new mission now, a new hope to cling to. They would deliver the chip and then disappear, two more shadows in a world of endless night. But as they sliced through the waves, the sky above them grew brighter, the neon glow of the city's rebirth reflected in the water. The city was a living, breathing entity, and it was fighting back. The corporations had underestimated the power of the people, the strength of the oppressed. And as they disappeared into the night, Nova couldn't help but feel a spark of hope, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, they could change the world. Maybe the neon nights of their city could give way to a brighter, more just dawn. The boat skimmed the water, the spray cold against their faces. The city grew smaller in the distance, the storm clouds parting to reveal the gleaming towers that had once been their prison. The Nexus Chip was a beacon of hope now, a promise that the world didn't have to be this way. They had a long road ahead, full of danger and uncertainty. But as they raced towards the horizon, the neon lights of the city fading behind them, Nova knew that she had made the right choice. The game was far from over, but now, they had a chance to rewrite the rules. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider subscribing to stay updated with our latest stories, give us a like if you want to see more, and drop a comment below to let us know your thoughts.